I have 4 spooky Famicom games to get you into a ghoulish mood this Halloween season. Japan was just barely celebrating Halloween during the Famicom boom of the 1980s, but after the popularity of horror movies and gaijin expats partying in Shibuya and Tokyo Disneyland, they have slowly started celebrating the haunted holiday. But they didn't stop there for being some perfect Halloween Famicom games. But you better subscribe. It's a terrible night to have a curse. Splatterhouse Wanpaku Graffiti by Namco from 1989. Japanese video game developer Namco made the arcade version of Splatterhouse in 1988, and it was a gory, side-scrolling 16-bit action game that took liberal inspiration from the horror movie trends of the 1980s. Splatterhouse Wanpaku Graffiti is a cute, super deformed, chibi action game for the Famicom that was actually made after the Splatterhouse arcade game, but before the PC Engine version. Even though the PC Engine and TurboGrafx-16 version of Splatterhouse is legendary, the Famicom game actually came out first. This is back when game developers who wanted to make Famicom games based on more powerful arcade hardware knew that they couldn't do it directly, so they made a cute Famicom game that was inspired by the original game, but was its own thing. Splatterhouse Wanpaku Graffiti is both a port of Splatterhouse and a parody of Splatterhouse. It also includes a whole bunch of pop cultural references from the 1980s, with the mini-bosses and bosses. It opens up with references to Friday the 13th, Thriller, The Exorcist, Poltergeist, and Evil Dead, and that's just the first couple stages. It has great controls. Our undead hockey mask-wearing hero runs, jumps, and swings his adorable cartoon meat cleaver into cartoon legions of the undead. It is both spooky and super cute. Some of the enemy characters are quite big and are made up of a ton of sprites, and there is a cool graphical effect where when they are beaten, they fly apart as the sprites that made them up break up. This game was excellent, made by Namco, and yet stayed in Japan. I have an idea why this game was not released in America. Probably because Nintendo of America had strict content guidelines for games, and Splatterhouse Wanpaku Graffiti featured crosses, blood, and cartoon gore, but come on, cartoon gore is awesome! It also came on a big cartridge, and my version came covered with stickers and had a slightly scruffy looking label. I also have a fan translation on a bootleg NES cart. This game wasn't officially released outside of Japan until 2020 as a part of the Namco Museum's Volume 1 compilation. Another reason why we might have never received this awesome game on the NES during its regular run is that Namco used to license their games to other publishers in the West, such as Tengu, aka Atari, and they alternated between being an official Nintendo publisher and on Nintendo of America's naughty list. Either way, this is an excellent game made by one of the best Famicom developers ever. It is a heck of a lot of fun, and it would absolutely appeal to American kids, but for whatever reason, we never got it. Not only is it a perfect game to play for Halloween, it's a perfect game to play any other time. Getufuma Den by Konami in 1987. Getufuma Den is the best Metroidvania game made by Castlevania developer Konami to never get an official release in the West. It is a Japanese Gothic horror game featuring Japanese mythology, rather than other Gothic horror games featuring Western mythology. It is the perfect horror of the East to Castlevania's horrors of the West. You play as Fuma, a samurai warrior who has to descend into the underworld to stop an evil demon lord and fight a slew of Japanese yokai and demons in the process. Getufuma Den clearly has Zelda 2, Dragon Buster, and Metroid as an influence, since this has a similar structure of having an overworld, an underworld actually, connected paths, and stages which can be traversed in any direction, our hero will find keys and items that help unlock previously closed branches. It actually predated Castlevania II Simon's Quest for Famicom Disk System by 2 months, but I'm sure both teams at Konami were aware since they likely shared overlapping development and came out just 2 months from each other in 1987. Fuma can run, jump, and slice through enemies way faster than any Belmont. It has great music, great Konami graphics with the artistic use of black in each sprite. This game was never officially released in the West, but there is a straight-up entire Getufuma Den DLC level in Castlevania Harmony of Despair for Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. After many years, it actually did get a new 2.5D follow-up, Getufuma Den Undying Moon, on Nintendo Switch. I have the original Famicom cart, and there is also excellent fan translations, such as the one on my bootleg Konami collections. I don't understand why this never left Japan, since US gamers would have totally been okay with samurais killing demons and monsters. Not to call it a cult hit like all the other games on this list, but it absolutely is. It is a great gothic action game made by Konami. It is basically a really good Metroidvania that is not an official Castlevania game, but it totally is a Castlevania game that they kept in Japan. It's right up there with Tsukimi Dango and Apple Cider, both sweet and perfect for Halloween. Holy Diver by Irene in 1989. Holy Diver is Irene taking on Castlevania and Mega Man as probably the most heavy metal 8-bit game ever made. You play a long-haired fireball-throwing hero with shoulder pads named Randy, as in legendary late metal guitarist Randy Rhoads, who's literally descending into hell fighting demons. You have a health meter and magic points, and you can alternate between different magic spells that either throw different fireballs or freeze things such as fire and lava, or shoot a heavy burst that breaks through armor. When you defeat a boss, you get a magic spell power-up, which you then use to go through the next stage. If that sounds a lot like Mega Man and Castlevania, basically it is. So, the story synopsis basically lists a half a dozen awesome English heavy metal bands from the 1980s, and the graphics also feature some serious 1980s heavy metal album cover imagery. This is probably the reason why it never got localized and brought to the US. This was right at the crescendo of the Satanic Panic, and not only did Nintendo of America disapprove of the depiction of real-world religions in games, but overt heavy metal leather BDSM imagery combined with nothing but heavy metal fantasy demon butt-kicking would probably not go over too well with the PTA groups in 1989 America. That sucks, because all the things that they think that this game would be bad actually make it freaking rule. Another reason why this game was probably highly unlikely to ever be released in the West during its initial run is the heavy metal references that were way too thick. Copyright law in Japan when it came to video games played fast and loose in the 1980s. The name of the game is actually the name of a song by Dio, and I'm sure that the artistic inspiration from the heavy metal album covers is probably a little too much at times. Another interesting thing to note is that Retrobit actually did do a modern release of this game on the NES on cartridge in 2018. I have a bootleg Famicom version which has a fan translation, but one of these days I wouldn't mind actually getting a Retrobit NES version if I happen to come across one. This game is quite good, quite hard, and absolutely freaking metal, and I would love to see an updated version of this game that would leave the graphics exactly the same but have an orchestrated heavy metal soundtrack. That would be amazing. Until then, you absolutely need to play Holy Diver for Famicom and NES. Abarenbou Tengu, also known as Zombie Nation, by Kaze in 1990. Originally, I wasn't going to include this one, but when I was looking for my other games, I saw my bootleg copy of Abarenbou Tengu, and I just had to talk about it in this video. This is a genuinely weird game that has a bit of a cult following and is quite creative. Abarenbou Tengu is a side-scrolling spaceship shooter where you play a giant floating Tengu mask of Yamato, the guardian god of peace, a traditional Japanese prankster crow demon of Japanese folklore. But not the rest of the demon, just the floating head. Normally Tengu has a body and wings, and they also have a long phallic nose. This guy has one. Apparently, in 1990X, an evil meteor crashed into Nevada and turned all the people of the United States into evil zombies. So our hero, the disembodied floating Tengu head, is out to purify and destroy the evil by spitting laser blasts and bombs out of his mouth and shuffling all of the afflicted accursed off their mortal coil. Our floating hero head thing is opposed by an evil zombie military with tanks, jet, and giant maser cannon sky lasers, and troops that shoot at you from the rooftops. Each of the 4 stages features a highly destructible environment where you can blow up buildings and fly through them. There is an easy mode and a hard mode, but even the easy mode is quite hard. The graphics alternate between being black and being bright, and it has quite a charming 8-bit flavor that has aged like a funky smelly cheese, and I say that with affection. This game has a reputation for being kusoge, or crappy game. Kusoge is a linguistic mashup of the Japanese word for crap, kuso, and half of the English word game. I take issue with the assertion that Abarenbou Tengu is kusoge. I would like you to consider Abarenbou Tengu not kusoge, but rather through the lens of an indie game, with all the fluff and circumstances that it entails. Believe it or not, this game actually got an American release in 1990, and it was called Zombie Nation, and it was just barely changed, except the head of the Tengu was changed into the severed floating head of a samurai warrior. Apparently, they thought that would appeal more to American kids. There were surprising little changes, except the evil Statue of Liberty had snakes for hair in the Japanese version, and the American version had turbo fire enabled by default. By the way, if you have a turbo button on your controller, the game is a bit easier, but not much. There actually was a modern re-release of Abarenbou Tengu in Zombie Nation for the Switch and PC, and it has instant rewind for those of you who lack honor and use such things. Either way, Abarenbou Tengu in Zombie Nation is a unique Halloween spooky trip, and if you've never played it, you really should check it out. It definitely embraces B-movie horror schlock, and I say that with affection from the bottom of my heart. The limited resolution of 8-bit graphics really make you use your imagination to get into a scary mood when combined with the very real adrenaline rush of a challenging action game. It is amazing that there still is a ton of Japanese 8-bit Famicom games that are still relatively underappreciated in the West. I love telling you about them, which is why you need to make sure that you are subscribed and share these videos with your friends and enemies who are into retro video games. This is 8bitjoystick. Stay awesome, play retro, and have a happy Halloween!